Because I am now 60 years old, I am not going to rely on keeping all of this in my brain. So I do have some papers here. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here very much. So, life, for me, can be strolling through a clearance aisle, especially at a garden shop. Life can be a lap filled with a dog or two. Life can be a circus, definitely with someone else's monkeys. Life can be an endless love affair with your best friend. Life can be an afternoon filled with sunshine and a tray of bedding plants waiting to be put in the ground. Did you guys realize I like to garden? Life can be a day at the beach with a great book. Life can be time with a grandchild. Life can be all of the above, but when you have family and friends to walk along beside you, the meaning can be magnified tenfold. I've always been surrounded by a large family. With a large family comes a life seasoned with the unexpected. You see, I had a perfect life planned. I would get married. I would have children, preferably a boy and then a girl. I would get a job, and then I would live happily ever after, right?
Yeah.
My blessings have been far greater than what I ever could have imagined. I definitely did not see myself traveling around the world or snorkeling, or maybe I should say trying to snorkel, in the Pacific Ocean in water filled with whales. Our God has glorious journeys set to unfold before us when we least expect it. So about this beautiful quilt here. I feel like quilts encompass many aspects of my life. My precious Granny Dixie made this quilt. Quilts are like storytellers to me. I come from a family of seamstresses. Life can be much like a quilt square, one color after another spilling over into the next. Relationships, milestones, challenges, celebrations. I think of my childhood with these seamstresses. They made everything I wore, and then they made these beautiful quilts from all of the fabric left over. As the years passed, these amazing ladies then produced these heirloom quilts to carry on their memories. Our lives played out on these quilts, from a simple pair of play shorts to a Sunday dress, to a prom dress, to clothing for your wedding party. Such talented ladies merely clothing their families as their mothers before them. So to help you better understand my story, you need a little background. I'm the oldest of 5 children, 3 daughters, 2 sons, 1 bathroom. I lost both of my grandfathers when I was 16 years old. Their deaths were 2 weeks apart. One of them had battled cancer, so we expected his death. It was just a matter of time. The other grandfather died from a traumatic accident. I lost my mother 8 years ago, and then I lost my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, 9 months after she had to say goodbye to her beloved daughter. Since we've just celebrated Mother's Day this past Sunday, I thought it only fitting to share about these 3 amazing women in my life. 2010 began a year, except I learned a lesson that year I'll forever embrace. The concept to always take advantage of opportunities placed before you. We live very busy lives, and sometimes it's just so much easier to say no. Instead, take a moment, clear your schedule, and make that adventure happen. This happened to me in 2010. My childhood always involved a trip to the beach. We would go with my father's family. His mother would come along, and the memories that we created over those years remain so close to my heart. I never ever turned down an opportunity to head to the beach. In fact, I have a suitcase packed in my car and a willing husband waiting on me to finish speaking, and then we're going to head to the beach. In May of 2010, I received such an invitation to head to the beach from my sister Terry. And my mother, my grandmother, and Lindsay would all be joining us. This was just too perfect to pass up. So off we went. We had much laughter, wonderful meals, shopping, and just soaking up all the energy of all these amazing women so very dear to my heart. But watching my mom and my grandmother was just precious. They truly had become the very best of friends after weathering many storms of life. As we prepared to say our goodbyes and start back home, we enjoyed one last cone of ice cream on the beach and reminisced a bit more about our adventures. 2 months later, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. So our lives came to a halt at that point. There was much confusion, perhaps a bit of anger. After a barrage of doctor's appointments, trips back and forth from me to Virginia, and finally my mother went to surgery for hopeful removal of the diseased portion of her pancreas. Another unfortunate side effect of a terminal illness is division within the immediate family. I was grieving for my mom and the pain that she was enduring, but I was seeing these adverse personalities start to emerge from my family. This was very confusing as well as unacceptable, at least to me. We needed to be a team. We needed to be united. We needed to be strong because our mother was in the midst of a very bad battle ahead. I did not want to be the eldest child any longer, and I also grieved for my dad and the decisions he was having to make without complete support from his children. It was a very dark time. Of the 5 children, 3 live in Roanoke, and then myself and my brother Chris lived outside of Virginia. So it was more challenging for us just to pick up at a phone call from the doctor and head to Roanoke, especially for Chris coming from San Francisco. Again, our busy lives do not allow for interruptions, such as a terminal illness. In the midst of traveling back and forth from Charlotte to Virginia, we were also planning a mission trip to India. I can say with certainty my heart was not in that trip, but I had requested the time off. My husband was leading it, and I had attended all the classes necessary for the training. I finally realized I needed to be in Virginia with my mom for the 2 weeks that I would have been in India. When I made that decision, I had such peace, complete peace, that I was following the right agenda. There will always be other mission trips. There'll be precious time with my mother was fleeting. Spending time in Virginia with my mother was a bright spot in the midst of this terrifying saga. Goodbyes are tough. Mama's was no different, except for the fact that she'd been battling this evil disease for 9 months. She was in excruciating pain, and she was longing for relief. We were sad to say goodbye, but relieved that she was no longer suffering. She was free to go home to her eternal home, March 2011. The next beautiful mother that I would like to talk about tonight is my Granny Dixie, the lady that made this beautiful quilt. She was always an extraordinary person in my life from day one. Most every one of my life milestones has Granny's touch. She even came to Winston-Salem when Steve was transferred to Charlotte. And I had a 7-month-old daughter. Granny came, she took complete care of this 7-month-old daughter. She helped me pack. And then she traveled with me to Charlotte to help me unpack and continue to take care of this 7-month-old daughter. Where did the years go? Granny and Paul were my mother's parents, and my parents lived with them briefly after they were married. Not only was I the first child, I was the first grandchild. Once my parents moved to Roanoke, I would beg to spend the summers with Granny and Paul, and I normally got my way. I was the first grandchild, remember? Granny and Paul were faithful stewards of the Lord. We all learned very quickly what this looked like. There was just a difference in their home. a warm presence, soft words, love. Pa would have me read the Bible to him at night before he went to sleep. I did not realize the training that was taking place, and oh, how I would love just to have a moment with him to share some of the adventures we've had on our mission trips. Our family cherished Granny and Pa. When I was 16, we received a call at our home, and my mother quickly passed the phone to me. She could not bear to listen to the news being delivered. My grandfather was a coal miner, and he'd been involved in a traumatic accident. He'd fallen from a railroad car, and the physicians were calling the family home. My mother was too traumatized to drive. My dad was out of town, so I drove. I was 16. I had the whole family in the car, and off we went. It seemed as though time stood still, but in the wake of the realization that Pa was extremely ill, 3 days later we were all saying our goodbyes. As usual, Granny Dixie was very stoic for her grieving family. Remember, she's a faithful servant, and she exhibited it in so many ways. Granny had relied on Pa for everything, and he was more than delighted to care for her. His eyes twinkled when she entered the room. He teased with her, and it was obvious he adored her. And in return, she cared for him right down to preparing his favorite meals, complete with cornbread and chocolate cream pie for dessert. I cherished every moment with them. She was 53 years old when she became a widow. I didn't realize at the time how young she truly was. She did not even know how to drive. The family developed a very different respect for her as she endured this painful time. My mother is the oldest of her 2 daughters, and so my mother became her fierce protector. In 2011, Granny was 89 years old, and she had to say goodbye to her beloved daughter, who had cared for her family during Pa's death. Granny's faith shone brightly. We celebrated her 90th birthday in November of 2011, just as her health started to decline. Once again, we were planning a trip to India for the next month, and once again I was torn as to my role. So I sought the wisdom of my dear grandmother, and of course it was her desire for me to make this trip. She knew I had stayed behind the last time. She wanted me to go, and she assured me Paul would want me to go too. On December the 27th, 2011, my birthday, while we were in the air on our way to India, Granny departed. Sorry. It's been so long ago, I still tugs at my heart. As sad as it was to no longer have her in my life, I had the lessons of her life, a life well lived, her love and her beautiful smile. As Paul told his young protege Timothy in regards to his heritage, "For I am mindful of the sincere faith within you, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I'm sure that it is in you as well." That's 2 Timothy 1:5. Our last mother, last wonderful woman. We've made it to India, 2011, December. From talking with those, and I see so many of my travel mates in here, talking with those who have traveled to another country for mission, the main purpose or reason I have received as far as why me? Why am I supposed to go? What can I do? How can I make an impact? And what about this language barrier? There is a power in a smile and a warm touch. And as we arrived, many of our team members were returning for 2nd and 3rd trips. Their faces were familiar to those young ones greeting us, but I was a new face. I was a pale-skinned white American with light hair. They wanted to touch us. I had no one calling out to me, no one running to greet me. But then, this beautiful young girl came up to me with this gorgeous smile. The first thing the Indian children do is to come up to you and they introduce themselves. So she is approaching me now to introduce herself. See, I'm still looking for that reason why I'm supposed to be here, the greater cause, my mission. I'm looking for that. And here is this beautiful child. Well, I was thankful at that time for sunglasses, because when the child introduced herself as Patricia, I could not contain my tears. You see, Patricia was my mother's name. And this little girl was the first child to come up to me out of the 50 plus kids running around us wanting to touch us. I later found that Patricia is an uncommon name in India. This was one of those moments when you feel God winking at you, reassuring you that He has everything under control, and you do have a purpose in India. I left a part of my heart in that country and will always count them as family. It would be a couple more trips to India before I would meet the dear Samori family on a visit to Grace Children's Home. For those of you who've had the pleasure of meeting this precious family, you understand completely what a dear family we encountered. We no longer stay in a hotel when we go to India. We stay in their home. They give us their beds to sleep in, and many times they sleep together. They have taken us in as family. Nirmala is their mother, and then Sunny and Ramya. The mention of their names causes my heart to ache deeply to see them, and even deeper ache is when we have to leave them. Nirmala is an outstanding mother to Sunny and Ramya, but also to the children of Grace Children's Home. True sacrifices are felt daily by the Samori family. They follow God's plan completely, and they're very obedient servants. When they traveled to Charlotte a couple of years ago, we had the privilege to open our home to them, to sit on our front porch with them and laugh. Last year, we actually were able to travel to New Zealand. Several of us traveled to New Zealand to meet with them. Ramya is currently finishing up a 2-year work assignment there through her business. Nirmala, as a widow, has a much different lifestyle than an American widow. Like my Granny Dixie, Nirmala was widowed at a young age, at 44. Like my grandmother, Nirmala did not know how to drive a car. Like my grandmother, Nirmala's husband was taken suddenly and died a short time after his accident. I had never given any thought to the similarities between these sweet women until I started putting my thoughts on paper. But the strongest similarity between these two women was their unwavering faith. I could go on about these women. I'm certain there are women exhibiting many of these same qualities in our presence tonight. Strong women enduring insurmountable obstacles, unwavering faith, quietly guiding those around them. I'd like to close with the following scripture. This comes from Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 9. There's an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to shun embracing, a time to search and a time to give up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear apart and a time to sew together, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Thank you, ladies, very much for listening.